the vast majority of the English population was reduced basically to just one rung above slavery, basically. At least 10 rebellions and revolts between 1066 to the English, culminating in the English Civil War. Okay, so the people are not happy.
Nobody would argue in this country, I don't think they would, that our system isn't broken. I think we can see it's broken. The people are extremely unhappy. We seem to be getting poorer, crime's out of control, mass migration's out of control. We've got to a stage now where not only everyone's always thought that politicians are liars. We've got essays wrote in Rome 2,000 years ago that say exactly the same thing. But we have a Labour government at the moment who only 6 months ago, 8 months ago, was telling us what they wouldn't do and what they would do. And 6 months later, they're breaking every promise they ever made and doing things they said they would never do.
Because they think they're immune. That's the issue.
I think they do think that. And to a certain extent, I think they're right in thinking that. Because I think the only difference between this Labour government and the Tory government was the Tory government lied to us just as much, but still pretended that they weren't lying. This government has realised, well, what's the point of pretending? They know we're lying. We know we're lying. We're going to continue lying. So why am I wasting my time pretending I'm not lying?
That's such a good analogy.
If anything, I think they're treating us a little bit better by not lying to our faces that they're not lying.
Sure.
Like all problems, these things don't happen overnight. So we didn't live in a perfect system 10 years ago, 100 years ago, and suddenly people blame Tony Blair broke this system. I don't have that. Things take a long time to break if they were ever working in the first place. Was our system ever really working for the people? What's the history behind that?
My statement would be, is that our system of governance has never worked for the people. Never. And it's never been about the people.
Oh, no.
It's always been about people in positions of power. And yet we've created this myth that somehow our system of government is about the people. Okay. Just a little comment about what you just said about Labour. I totally agree with that statement. In fact, if anything, we can be thankful for what the Labour Party is doing right now, because they are at least opening up people's eyes to the bankruptcy of socialism. And not only the bankruptcy of socialism, but also, which, I think Keir Starmer is a neo-Marxist. That's my position. But also just the bankruptcy of the system, as you just said. The Conservatives are just the other side of the coin. So if anything, yes, thank you, Keir Starmer, for showing yourself as a tyrant and that we live under a tyrannical rule. So for me, it goes all the way back to 1066.
Right.
And, the Normans came over in 1066, won the Battle of Hastings, some conflicts after that. But let's just talk a little bit previously to 1066, what existed there before. The people, the indigenous people before the Normans came over, were just in the throes of forming a society in which they recognized themselves as English and in which they were actually content with their lot in life. They were content with their landmass. And so you had these Anglo-Saxons in the south. Then you had a mix of Anglo-Saxons and Danes as you went further north. You have the Celts in Cornwall, you had the Celts in Wales, you had the Celts in Scotland. And so the Englishness was very much the Anglo-Saxon in England into the Danelaw area of Yorkshire and beyond. And so that was defined as England. Okay. And so, but there was very much a period in history in which that group was beginning to identify themselves as English. Okay. It was still in formation. But the thing about them that I find interesting is that, yes, there were border clashes between, the Scots in the north and the Anglo-Saxon Danes in the south. But actually, these people groups were quite happy with their allotted spaces. There was no desire for the Anglo-Saxons to invade Scotland, for instance. They were content with their lot in life. And then came the Normans. And the Normans won the Battle of Hastings. Harold, bless his heart, made a strategic mistake, in my opinion. He should have withdrawn and gathered more forces. He'd already fought a war up north, battle up north. And he had to rush down to Hastings to fight this war. So, he made a tactical mistake, but the Normans won it. Okay. Now, when the Normans won that battle, we can have the conversation that William felt that he was entitled to the throne, etc., through Edward the Confessor. The Normans then embarked on a system of repression. They committed massacres of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic community in the south, and they committed what can really only be considered in modern times as a genocide, the harrying of the north, of the Anglo-Saxon and Dane community in the north. And so from that period in time, the Normans really suppressed the English nest that was developing at that point in time. The English average Joe became a second-class citizen. There were different punishments for if you had Norman blood as regard to English blood. All of a sudden, the English were dispossessed of their land, and the Normans introduced the feudal system, in which all of the land belonged to the king, and he gave his land to his trusted servants, and that hierarchy continued all the way down until he became no more than a serf and a slave. So in the Norman system, which introduced the feudal system, the vast majority of the English population was reduced basically to just one rung above slavery, basically. Not only that, but the English language was removed from the law and from commerce, so that Latin French, the Norman Latin French, was used. And so here's an Englishman. This is how, and this is almost ironic for today's world, right? Here's an Englishman in 1066, the years after. He has to go to court. He needs a translator to understand what's happening in a normal court, because it's all in Latin or French, not in the English vernacular. And it took up until the end of the 15th century for that French law to be replaced by the English vernacular in the law courts. And it wasn't actually until 1731, until actually there was a legal ban on using French, law French, in law courts, and it had to be in an understandable language to everybody, the English vernacular.
And there's a reason for that, and that's because if you can control who has access to the law, then that makes you a powerful person.
Exactly.
So if the average person doesn't understand anything, it's a different language, then they've got to come to you and rely on you, and it's power.
It is power. That's what it's all about. And so, you're an Englishman in a court and you're having to translate her. I mean, that's how ridiculous is that? It's your land, right? So this is what happened. Now, obviously, over 200, 300 years, 400 years, both people groups intermingled and intermarried. And so we have a development of an Anglo-Norman culture, okay? And we can say, well, that became a rich tapestry. But actually, only in a certain segment of society, because actually the Anglo-Saxon Celtic Dane bloodline was still the main bloodline of the majority of the indigenous population of the lands. So we have here then a system that has come over from the continent, the Normans. They have repressed Englishness. They've made the English second-class citizens, imposed their own law, their own terms, dispossessed them of their land. And by force of power, the English have to now coexist with that system. Okay. And so we have this now graduation of a relationship where now the king, as the head of the feudal system, he has the divine right of kings. He can do as he pleases. But we know that from 1688, or from 1066 to 1688, that period of where the monarch, we could say, was, well, up until the English Civil War, when the monarch had the divine right of kings, we know there is friction there, because there's at least 10 rebellions and revolts between 1066 to the English, culminating in the English Civil War. Okay, so the people are not happy. So this fracture that we're seeing now has been repeated throughout history, starting with the Peasants' Revolt and different revolts and rebellions, again, and all against the king, all against the crown. Okay, and so people are recognizing it's not a fair system. We want rid of this system, or we want a recalibration of this system. So this cry for a recalibration or remodel is nothing new. So then we get to the English Civil War, 1642 to 51. In which Charles I is deposed. Eventually he's beheaded. And then we have the Protectorate under Cromwell. Yep. And then, as you say, he dies, his son's not up to the job, and so they bring Charles II back on the throne. Yep. Now, we're told that was what the people wanted. Well, I would say, I'd query that and say, well, Was it?
Which people?
Which people? Which people? You know, the victors write history. Okay. So if you're the legal scribes and you're writing history as an educated from Norman bloodline or Plantagenet line, you're going to write it in your favor, right? So, you know, we're told that the people wanted Charles II back on the throne. And then we had the Glorious Revolution. Okay. And then after that, we had the Bill of Rights, 1688. And bloodless revolution. But then we say, well, if that was the Bill of Rights was great. Well, for its time, fine. But for me, it missed an opportunity, which was to completely remodel society away from the monarch. But instead of doing that, we kept the monarch as the head of state and then try and make a parliamentary system fit in it. So for the last 300 years, what we've had in a sense from a phrase from the Bible, from the New Testament, is we've had the principle of trying to pour new wine into old wineskins. The old wineskins being a monarchical system that doesn't work, that is abusive and unfair, and that throughout the world it's discarded wherever there's opportunity to. And also, the king, monarchs never give up power unless they're either told to or made to. Okay? That's the history of monarchs. And so we have that whole history.
That's the history of mankind.
Well, exactly. So we have this whole period from 1066 to 1688 where the people, and even some of the barons, etc., are removing power from the monarch consistently, starting with the Magna Carta, right? Consistently removing power, not giving him power. And then we get to 1688, in which we say, okay, well, we're going to leave you as the head of state. It's going to be a Commonwealth system, but it's still going to be your government, you know.